Good morning, Patreon. Continuing in what is appearing to be an ongoing series on math for the village. We did wheat previously, and now we're going to look at sheep math for the village. Back to my lap boards, as they're called, mini whiteboards, which is a holdover from training with a certain brother who requires that you show up with a minimum of one of these in order to participate. And so I have several of these. And the concept here, looking at, is it possible to provide the type of calories that are needed to sustain life for a village full of people using not modern agricultural techniques, but more primitive agricultural techniques. And unlike wheat, which I have not yoded with my hands very much, sheep is something over the last 5 years I've gotten a lot of reps and sets on. I certainly don't know everything there is to know about sheep, but I have given away, I believe it's 7 Hebrew starter sets, which is a ram and 2 or 3 ewes. Over the years, I have slaughtered and butchered dozens of sheep. I ate sheep for dinner last night, and I fed sheep in the field this morning before shooting this video. So I've got a good bit of yod going on when it comes to sheep. So let's look at sheep math, being able to provide for the village. And we're going to, again, base our numbers on if 100% of your protein needs came from sheep, this is what the numbers would look like. Although I would highly recommend that you cycle in other sources of protein like meat birds, eggs, possibly even goats, maybe cattle. Then, of course, you have your requisite fishing, hunting, gathering, etc. Clean fish, clean, deer, things of that nature. So, sheep math for the village. So, the average human being requires 0.36 grams of protein per pound of body weight. For easy math, I rounded that to 1 gram per 3 pounds of body weight. So if you're 120 pounds, you need 40 grams of protein per day. Then on from there, 150 is 50 grams, 180 pounds is 60 grams, 210 pounds is 70 grams, 240 pounds is 80 grams, and a 240-pound fit person is not somebody you want to lay your hands on. 270 pounds, 90 grams of protein. 270-pound fit person, not somebody you want to lay your hands on. Although when we get into the 270 to 300-pound range, probably want to be doing some PT now before the balloon goes up, because you're very likely carrying around a strategic reserve of calories around your waist. At 300 pounds, you require 100 pounds or 100 grams of protein per day. These are per day numbers on the grams of protein. Now, lamb has 110 grams of protein per pound of meat. This is all OSINT stuff. So if we look at a family of 5, aka a tent within, or a household within your village, or your hamlet perhaps, and we assume that that family of 5 has an average body weight of 180 pounds, because some of those people are probably going to be women and children, some of those people are probably going to be men. But let's assume 180 pounds a day, or 180 pounds per person, times 5 people, works out to 900 pounds, which requires 3 pounds of sheep meat per day to meet all the protein needs of these people, or 0.6 pounds of sheep meat per day per person. Now, according to the interwebs, there's 250 calories per 3-ounce serving of sheep, or roughly 1,400 calories per pound. Sheep per pound actually have more calories than something like goats do, typically speaking, because sheep have more fat on their bodies than goats do. And that's a source of good fat. That's good fat. We want that fat. Fat is very important, believe it or not. Your brain predominantly runs on fat. Your nervous system runs on fat. Fat is good. Sheep is also a significant source of iron, vitamin B6, magnesium, calcium, and cobalamin, or B12. Cobalamin, which is one of these B-complex vitamins, helps build red blood cells. It is essential to the formulation and continuing longevity of DNA and RNA. It helps the body produce energy on a mitochondrial level. It's good for building the tissues inside the body. It's what your nerve cells are made of. and it helps the body convert glucose, sugar, carbohydrates, into fuel. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, aerobic versus anaerobic respiration, different video. And I am not a nutritionist, and I'm not a, fitness consultant, but I do know a handful of things about how the body works. Vitamin B12, aka cobalamin, works hand in hand with B9, which is folic acid, to control homocysteine levels in your blood. Homocysteine lowers the risk of heart disease and cleans genetic material. Ever wonder why those people in the Bible lived for so long and why they took their genetic cleanliness so seriously? AKA, why did the Father tell them to eat sheep and not all this other trash? There you go. So, pretty important as far as eating lamb, sheep meat. It's got some really good stuff in it. And as somebody who eats sheep meat, let me not exaggerate, at least twice per week, in some cases every day of the week, I've found it to be very good for me. I enjoy it. And there's nothing like eating something that you literally raised from the moment it came out of its mother's rear end to the moment it took its last breath. It's very rewarding. Now, cool story, Bear. Let's get down to brass tacks. Roger that. Stand by. Coffee. All right. Yield off of a sheep. These are numbers off of the interwebs, but they do dovetail into my own experiences. Typically speaking, with a sheep, the carcass weight will be roughly 50% of the live weight. So if your sheep weighs 100 pounds when it's, eating grass and breathing and having a happy life, the carcass weight will be approximately 50% of that. So 50-pound carcass. That's after the guts, the wool, the skin, and a wet sheep. Oh my gosh, they weigh twice as much, right? They wear a woolly coat, and there's definitely something to be said when you skin a sheep. If you take that cape, the skin off of the animal, it's heavy. It's very heavy. So yeah, makes sense. So your carcass weight is going to be after the removal of the guts, which there's certain things inside the guts that I would not throw away, especially in a survival situation. Things like the kidneys, the liver, the heart, all of that is meat. You can eat it outright, or you can especially feed it to your dogs, which we do on the regular. And if you've seen our dogs on camera, they are big, happy, healthy killers. So, in fact, they sit patiently as we butcher, awaiting their butcher treats. The heart, the kidneys, the liver rather, not the lungs. The lungs are a different type of material. There's also inside the carcass what are called the mock tenders, aka fish tenders, and it's a cut that's often overlooked inside of the animal, so don't miss that. They're mini tenders that run along the inside of the spine, inside the cavity, and they're, in my opinion, the best cut on the animal. A, because nobody knows they're there, or very few people know they're there, and B, because they do nothing. They're just little tenders about 10 to 12 inches long, maybe an inch and a quarter, inch and a half in diameter. They weigh maybe half a pound a piece, and they're absolutely delicious, pan-fried with some, salt, pepper, onion powder, and a little bit of butter, sprig of rosemary. Yeah, cook them to medium, let them rest 5 minutes, cut against the grain. Oof, oof. All right, so carcass weight is 50% of live weight. And carcass weight, no guts, no skin, no wool, no hooves, no head. The heads are also surprisingly heavy. So you end up from a 100-pound sheep with a carcass weight of approximately 50% of that. And then 75% of that carcass weight ends up being your meat, which is at approximately a 35-pound meat yield from a 90-pound lamb. That lines up with what we've seen with all the sheep that I've slaughtered and butchered. Now, we run Katahdin sheep. Katahdin sheep are specifically a breed of sheep that have been selectively bred throughout generation after generation to produce incredibly high quality meat and high quality yields. They are meat sheep. They're not wool sheep. They're not dairy sheep. They are meat sheep. And the quality of the meat is very, very good. I prefer, honestly, eating my sheep off of my field to going and getting lamb in a restaurant or buying lamb at the store, because they're just excellent, our sheep. Also, note the size of a Katahdin sheep. A female at 14 months old, which typically you're going to slaughter before 14 months old, at or before 14 months. A female at 14 months is 120 pounds roughly, and a male is 140 pounds roughly. My current ram, Jose, who's he's probably 3.5 years old, I would say easily weighs 180 to 200 pounds. Now, he's also going to taste like a 3.5-year-old male when we eat him, but that's okay. You grind that sucker, season him up with some sausage seasoning or Italian seasoning or whatever you got, and he'll taste divine. But the yields off of Katahdin are considerable as compared to other breeds of sheep. So we specifically sought out Katahdin for that reason, and I specifically recommend them to other people looking to raise sheep for meat because of the size of the sheep, because of the carcass weight. So, at 120 to 140 pounds at 14 months, and frankly, a lot of our sheep achieve that before a year old. I have big sheep. Everybody who sees my sheep tell me that. We have seen a meat yield off of our sheep at approximately 1 year of 45 to 50 pounds. Now, if we use that 45-pound number, and we know that we need 3 pounds per day per family of 5, as we established on whiteboard number 1 back here, that means that each sheep carcass, if we're getting 100% of our protein from sheep alone, 1 sheep carcass is required every 2 weeks, every 15 days per family of 5, which equates to 26 sheep per year. Now, I realize for some of y'all, that sounds like a lot of sheep. For me, it doesn't. I have 26 sheep in my field, praise Yah, currently, as of this very moment. Now, the other thing to understand is you can't eat all the sheep or you won't get more sheep. So what exactly does that look like? If you get 100% of your protein from sheep, if you get 100% of your protein from sheep alone, and we estimate a birth rate of 1.5 lambs per ewe, which, important to point out here, Katahdins typically throw twins. Occasionally they'll throw triplets. Asterisk. Their first lambing, they almost always throw singles. Almost always throw singles. And so your first time around, your first lambing with your ewes, you're not going to get 2 sheep. You're not going to get a birth rate of 1.5 average. You're going to get a birth rate of 1. And it may be less than 1 because new ewes sometimes lose their babies. Okay, but assume 1, birth rate of 1 for your first time around. And sheep, unlike goats can kid approximately twice per year. They have like a 5-month gestation period or so. They come back into heat, and so goats will reproduce faster than sheep. Sheep, from the time they're in heat, from the time they're in estrus to the time they drop a baby, is 8 months. And so you get 3 lambings every 2 years with sheep, if your rams are in with your ewes 24/7, 365, if you're not holding your rams back, which we do not hold our rams back. And interestingly, what happens when you don't hold your rams back is all of your ewes sync up in estrus. And so you still end up having a fairly short lambing season because all of your ewes are in estrus at the same time. They're all bred at the same time. They don't breed unless they're in estrus. So they all breed at the same time in the same 10 to 14 day period. They all drop their babies because they all got pregnant at the same time in the same 10 to 14 day period. And so you still have relatively short, concise lambing seasons, with the added benefit of having the ram in with the flock, which provides protection to the flock if something's trying to prey upon the flock. Having a big, angry, strong ram that's going to literally kill that thing, good to go. The ram, your lead ram, also polices all the juvenile males because they will try and bang their moms and everything else, and that's bad for genetics. And so having the ram in with the juveniles is good because he keeps the juvenile males off of the ewes. So for us, because of those reasons and for simplicity, we keep our ram in with our ewes. So now, assuming a birth rate of 1.5 lambs per ewe, because come second lambing, Katahdins will throw twins, if not triples. Now, some sheep will always only throw a single, but that single, by the second lambing, ends up being about twice the size of the twins. They're very big babies. So if you have sheep A that throws a single and sheep B that throws twins, if you were to compare the body weight and size of that single versus the twins, those two twins would add up to that one single, if that makes sense. So if they do continue to throw singles, they're big singles. And that's good because we're going to eat these jokers, right? So, assuming a birth rate of 1.5 lambs per ewe for 5 people at 26 sheep per year, and here's the crux of the video, but again, we had to lay 16 minutes of groundwork to get to this point, otherwise there'd be too many ancillary questions and it would derail the conversation from the type of information that we're driving at here. 5 people would require 26 sheep per year, which with a 1.5 birth rate would be 17 ewes. That's what I have. It's not a big deal. And we're going to come back to that again in a moment when we talk about sustainability, viability with primitive systems. 10 people would require 52 sheep per year or 35 ewes in the flock. 50 people, and by the way, one ram can service 20 to 40 ewes. Yeah, like Solomon and all his wives, right? 50 people would need to eat, based upon these numbers, 160 sheep per year, which would be 107 ewes. And I got this number wrong. So this would be 321 ewes if we're going to eat 480 sheep per year. Let me change that. I don't know how I came up with that number. That's bad math. Forgive me. It's early and I'm still caffeinating. 321 ewes in that flock to feed 150 people. If we look at the math, right? Yes, there's a certain economy of scale here, but we can also look at the math and see that it works out to about 2 to 3 ewes per person per year. So that's some pretty simple math, right? If you say, if we're going to get 100% of our protein from sheep, 3 ewes per person per year. That's pretty basic math right there. If we're going to get, half of our protein from sheep, that's 2 ewes per person per year, right? A third of our protein is going to come from sheep. That's 1 ewe per person per year. Pretty basic math right there. That's good. And again, I wanted to lay the groundwork so we could get to the basic math portion of this. Okay. So 5 people, right? You're talking a tent, right? This is basically my household. Requires 26 sheep per year or 17 ewes that are being consistently bred. Yeah, that's totally doable. We do that without trying. Praise Yah. Right? And like I said, we've given away more sheep than I currently own. And we eat sheep often. And I still have 26 sheep in the field, right? So once you hit a critical mass of approximately a dozen to 15 sheep in your flock, this being a ram and then ewes that are of a breeding age, at that point, they just keep reproducing. And it almost, praise Yah, gets to the point of like, what am I going to do with all these sheep? Answer, you're going to eat them because that's why we have them. Okay. So for our village, right, if we figure a hamlet is 50 people, we're going to want about 100 ewes in that flock if all of our calories are going to come from sheep. If half of our calories are going to come from sheep, we're going to want about 50 ewes in that flock. Okay. If we have a village of 150 people, we're going to want about 300 ewes in that flock if all of our protein comes from sheep. If half of our protein comes from sheep, we're going to want about 150 ewes in that flock. Tracking? Cool. Now, last ancillary bit of data. It's generally accepted, and again, this is based upon way too many variables. Remember when we talked about in wheat over here, we talked about wheat, and we talked about this. Yields are highly dependent on elevation, seed type, planting methods, weed suppression, fertilizer, rainfall or irrigation, sunlight, seasonality, diseased pests, etc., aka Yahuwah's will be done. Right? That same thing goes for sheep breeding protocols and your pasture. So if we look down here, bad pasture, like not great grass, will support rotationally grazing, 5 sheep per acre. Good pasture, whether it's native pasture or improved pasture, will support rotationally grazing, 10 sheep per acre. So if we have good pasture in our village of 150 people, and we have 300 ewes that we're running, that means we need 30 acres of pasture, right? 10 sheep per acre. I hope you're taking notes during these, by the way, or screenshots or whatever. So again, that gives us some numbers to back into when we look at how big does the village need to be. Now, the other thing to understand is like, while yes, I, in my household, 5 people, have 26 sheep. Literally, currently, that's the number I have right now. I am one household as part of the village, and I am not the only person that has animal agriculture. I'm certainly not the only person that has sheep. So when we look at this number, say of 50 people, that's 100 plus sheep. That's a lot of sheep, man. Well, not all those sheep necessarily need to be in the same place at the same time. In fact, there's something to be said as far as maintaining clean genetics that they're not. That they're perhaps separate flocks, separate herds that you can trade back and forth, ewes and rams in order to keep the genetic diversity where you want it so that you don't end up with a whole bunch of inbreeding, which is going to affect your birth rate, right? So swapping your ram out every 3 years, right? Bringing new ewes in from a different flock every year or every other year by trading with your brethren. And that trade can be from one side of the fence line to the other, or from, wherever, however far away to however far away. But rotating in new blood is very important. And so the distribution of where all these sheep are, right? You don't necessarily need a flock of 100 plus sheep. And especially like if predation happens, if people be sneaking onto your property and stealing sheep, etc. Now, from a security standpoint, it's easier to protect one flock of sheep than to protect 3 or 4 flocks of sheep, right? It's easier to protect one flock of sheep with 107 ewes in it, plus some rams, so call that 110 sheep, all in one place. And to move them all, that's easier, rotationally grazing, than it is to protect 3 flocks of 35 or 40 sheep. But having all your eggs in one basket, or not necessarily having the pasture to support 100 sheep in one place, right? You can, and we do, break them up into different flocks in different areas of the property or on different properties. But on bad pasture, you're looking at 5 sheep per acre. And I would also submit Katahdins do a very good job of browsing, so they do a good job in the woods. So in the woods, I would estimate 5 sheep per acre because we've run ours in the woods as well. 5 sheep per acre of woods. And good pasture, 10 sheep per acre. So now you have those numbers to back into right there. I hope this is making sense. I hope you're getting some value from this. It's giving you some things to think about as you're developing your end times agricultural protocols for how to survive systemic collapse in your village or your hamlet. And don't let the numbers scare you, because while the numbers at the bottom of this board seem intimidating, they're not. this is actually very much so in line with how we live currently. And as far as the viability of being able to do this post-event, for sure, it's absolutely doable. There's two pieces of technology that I use right now in order to take care of my sheep. The first is Gallagher's Smart Fence, which we've shot multiple videos on. And it's an electric fence that uses a solar charged battery to pulse 8,000 volts of DC down the fence to keep the sheep on the inside of the fence and the bad guys on the outside of the fence. My sheep have come to respect the fence so much that that fence doesn't even need to be on for them to stay inside of it. They see the white electric fence wire and they don't go near it. In fact, I have brethren that use the same fence and rarely, if ever, actually turn it on because their sheep have become so attuned to the fence that they do not transgress the boundaries of the fence. Okay, so even if the solar charger battery thing was to break, our sheep have been taught at this point, don't touch the fence. And so I can and I do rotationally graze my sheep using the Gallagher Smart Fence, and it works great. The other piece of technology that I use to take care of my sheep every day is a four-wheeler that has a water tank on the back of it. Now, the four-wheeler obviously runs on fossil fuel. There's some workarounds to that. You can have your sheep in a place where you don't have to haul water to them, and in a perfect world, I wouldn't have to either. That's something to think about. And then if they have grass and they have water, I don't need the four-wheeler at this point, right? We also bring our sheep grain, and you absolutely do not have to bring grain to sheep. We bring grain to our sheep every morning. They get approximately 1 quart per head. And the reason we do that is the grain makes them taste better. It helps them keep fat on. And so that when we butcher them, they're big, fat, plump, juicy, delicious sheep. But I have brethren, multiple brethren, that in no way provide grain to their sheep. And their sheep are still big, fat, healthy, tasty sheep. So we do that specifically for the quality of meat, not because it's required for the sheep to survive. And so if you were to position your sheep in such a way that they had organic access to water, you didn't have to haul it in, and they had grass to eat, now all you need technology-wise is a pair of boots to get at them, to keep an eye on them, right? And a way to keep them contained. And like I said, that Gallagher Smart Fence works great. You could also, what we would call like hard fence it with barbed wire, although I don't recommend barbed wire for fence. I much prefer field fence, like 6x6 field fence for sheep. But you could absolutely drive T-posts or wooden posts and stretch field fence or barbed wire or whatever to keep your sheep on the inside and the bad guys on the outside, and then rotationally graze your sheep through different subsectors of that pasture that you developed by hard fencing around the perimeter. So as far as viability with primitive technologies, for sure, sheep have been, people have been herding sheep for thousands of years, way before four-wheelers and Gallagher Smart Fence existed. So it's super viable as a primitive technology. The shepherd is one of the oldest types of work that one could do, oldest professions on the face of the earth, right? And just read Genesis, right? The reason Abraham and Lot had to go separate ways was because their flocks and their herds were too big for them to stay in the same geographic area. Yeah, so rewind 3,000 years or so, and shepherd was absolutely a job. The sons of Jacob were shepherds, right? Remember, the reason that Joseph gets thrown into a hole is because he had to go up to Shechem to check on his brothers, who were supposed to be up there working the flock, but they were probably up there banging Shechem ladies. Whole nother story. Read Jasher on why that could have happened. But anyway, so shepherding a flock is absolutely capable of being done with primitive technologies. And the numbers shouldn't scare you, especially when you consider that these numbers at the bottom are as if 100% of your protein is coming from sheep. You start to supplement that with chickens, with eggs, with goats, with cattle, with deer, with fish, with dove if you want, whatever you got. Assuming it's in compliance with Leviticus 11, these numbers get smaller and smaller. So I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, interested in your comments down below. Love y'all, Patreon. Have a blessed day. Shalom.